Dr. Evelyn Harker gazed out the rain-streaked window of the train, watching as the lush, rolling hills of the English countryside blurred into a somber, mist-laden landscape. Her destination was the small, unassuming town of Ravenscroft, nestled in a valley that seemed perpetually shrouded in fog. It was a place she had read about in dusty tomes and obscure journals, a place where history whispered its darkest secrets to those who dared to listen. St. Augustine's Cathedral was her true destination. The ancient edifice loomed large in her mind, a monument of Gothic grandeur and mystery. Built in the 12th century, it had stood the test of time, weathering centuries of war, plague, and reformations. But it was not its age or architecture that captivated Evelyn. It was the rumors, the unspoken tales of sorrow and betrayal that seemed to cling to its stone walls like a miasma. Evelyn had always been drawn to the darker facets of history, the untold stories that lay buried beneath layers of dust and neglect. Her colleagues at the university had often jested that she was more of a detective than a historian, always seeking out the skeletons in history's closet. It was this insatiable curiosity that had led her to Ravenscroft, and she felt a thrill of anticipation as the train began to slow, signaling her arrival. As she stepped onto the platform, a chill wind greeted her, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and earth. The town itself was quaint, with cobblestone streets and half-timbered houses that looked as though they had been plucked from a bygone era. It was picturesque, almost idyllic, but there was an undercurrent of melancholy that Evelyn couldn't quite place. She made her way to the small inn where she would be staying, a charming establishment called the Raven's Nest. The innkeeper, a kindly woman with gray hair and a warm smile, welcomed her with a cup of steaming tea and a room key. "You're here to visit the cathedral, I suppose," the innkeeper said, her eyes twinkling with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Yes," Evelyn replied, taking a sip of the tea. "I'm researching its history for a new book. I've heard there are some rather interesting stories associated with it." The innkeeper's smile faded slightly, and she glanced around as if to make sure no one was listening. "Interesting indeed. But be careful, dear. St. Augustine's has a way of getting under your skin." Evelyn smiled, unfazed by the warning. "That's exactly what I'm hoping for." The next morning, with her notebook and camera in hand, Evelyn set out for the cathedral. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the towering spires of St. Augustine's as they pierced the gray sky. The cathedral stood at the edge of the town, its massive oak doors and intricate stone carvings a testament to the craftsmanship of a bygone era. As she approached, she felt a strange sense of déjà vu, as if she had been here before in a dream. Pushing the feeling aside, she stepped through the doors and into the dimly lit interior. The air was cool and smelled faintly of incense and old stone. Stained glass windows cast colorful patterns on the floor, and the silence was almost palpable, broken only by the soft echo of her footsteps. Evelyn spent the morning exploring the nave, marveling at the craftsmanship and noting details that might be useful for her research. But it was the crypt that intrigued her the most. According to her sources, the crypt held the remains of several notable figures from the town's history, as well as some less savory characters who had been buried in unmarked graves. Finding the entrance to the crypt was not difficult. It was a heavy iron-bound door near the back of the cathedral, partially obscured by shadows. She pushed it open, the hinges creaking in protest, and descended the narrow stone steps into the darkness below. The air grew colder as she went deeper, and the light from her flashlight cast eerie shadows on the walls. She felt a shiver run down her spine but pressed on, driven by her need to uncover the secrets hidden within these ancient walls. At the bottom of the steps, the crypt opened into a series of low, arched chambers. The walls were lined with stone coffins, many of them worn and crumbling with age. Evelyn walked slowly, her eyes scanning the inscriptions and carvings, trying to piece together the stories of those who lay here. It was in the farthest chamber that she found it, a hidden alcove, partially concealed behind a fallen slab of stone. Her heart quickened as she squeezed through the narrow gap and into the small space beyond. There she found a row of unmarked graves, each one marked only by a simple cross. Evelyn knelt beside one of the graves, brushing away the dust and dirt to reveal an inscription carved into the stone floor. It was a name, barely legible, and a date that suggested the grave was several centuries old. As she traced the letters with her fingers, a sudden chill swept through the chamber, and she heard it. A faint whisper, so soft she almost thought she had imagined it. "Help us." Evelyn froze, her heart pounding. She looked around, but there was no one there. The crypt was silent once more, save for the distant drip of water. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the eerie sensation. "Just my imagination," she muttered to herself, but as she turned to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was not alone. As she emerged from the crypt and into the daylight, Evelyn couldn't help but glance back at the cathedral. The whispers in the walls had only just begun, and she knew that the dark secrets of St. Augustine's were waiting to be uncovered. Evelyn's days in Ravenscroft began to fall into a pattern. Mornings spent poring over ancient records in the town's modest library, afternoons exploring the cathedral and its grounds, and evenings back at the Raven's Nest, where she meticulously documented her findings. Despite the innkeeper's subtle warnings and the strange feeling of being watched, Evelyn's determination only grew stronger. The whisper she had heard in the crypt haunted her, a spectral thread that wove through her every waking thought. On the third day, while examining the cathedral's extensive collection of relics and artifacts, Evelyn stumbled upon an old ledger hidden behind a row of dusty hymnals. Its leather cover was cracked and worn, the pages brittle with age. As she leafed through it, she realized it was a record of baptisms, marriages, and burials dating back to the cathedral's early years. But there were gaps, whole sections where the ink had been deliberately smudged or pages torn out. One name, however, stood out: Marjorie Whitcomb, a young woman whose death was recorded in the late 1600s. Next to her name, someone had scrawled a single word in the margin: traitor. Intrigued, Evelyn jotted down the details and resolved to learn more about Marjorie. That evening, as she reviewed her notes, Evelyn felt an inexplicable chill in her room. The air seemed to grow colder, and she could have sworn she heard faint whispers just beyond her hearing. Shaking off the eerie sensation, she turned in for the night, but sleep did not come easily. The next morning, Evelyn returned to the cathedral with renewed purpose. She approached Father Benedict, the elderly priest who had overseen the cathedral for decades, hoping he might provide some insight. "Father, do you know anything about Marjorie Whitcomb?" she asked, showing him the entry in the ledger. Father Benedict's face paled and he crossed himself. "Marjorie Whitcomb," he muttered, eyes distant. "A tragic soul. Her story is one of sorrow and injustice." Evelyn leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "What happened to her?" The priest sighed heavily. "Marjorie was accused of witchcraft during the height of the hysteria that gripped our town centuries ago. She was a healer, you see, and many turned to her in times of need. But when crops failed and sickness spread, fear and suspicion grew. The church leaders, in their misguided zeal, condemned her. She was executed and buried in an unmarked grave." "That's horrible," Evelyn whispered, feeling a pang of sympathy for the long-dead woman. "And this was all sanctioned by the church?" Father Benedict nodded, his expression grim. "Those were dark times, my child. The church has much to atone for." As Evelyn delved deeper into the cathedral's history, she found more accounts of unjust persecutions and cruel punishments, all hidden away in the forgotten corners of records and journals. Each discovery seemed to stir the air around her, and the whispers grew more frequent and insistent. One afternoon, as she was examining a particularly ancient manuscript in the cathedral's archive room, Evelyn heard the whispers again, louder this time. They seemed to emanate from the very walls, a chorus of ghostly voices pleading for justice. She strained to make out the words, but they were just beyond comprehension, a maddening murmur that sent chills down her spine. Determined to uncover the source, she followed the sound through the winding corridors of the cathedral. The whispers led her to a disused chapel, its doors long sealed and covered in dust. With a sense of foreboding, she pushed the doors open, the hinges groaning in protest. The chapel was dark, save for the faint light filtering through the stained glass windows. At the far end stood an altar, and behind it, an old weathered tapestry depicting a scene of judgment and retribution. As Evelyn approached, the whispers intensified, filling her ears with a cacophony of voices. She reached out to touch the tapestry, and as her fingers brushed the fabric, a sudden overwhelming vision engulfed her. She saw the faces of the condemned, their eyes wide with terror, and felt their pain and despair. She witnessed the cruel acts committed by those who had wielded power in the name of faith, and the injustice that had stained the cathedral's history. Staggering back, Evelyn gasped for breath, her heart pounding. The vision faded, but the echoes of the voices remained, a haunting reminder of the wrongs that had been done. Evelyn knew then that she was not merely an observer of history. She had become a part of it. The spirits of St. Augustine's were reaching out to her, seeking redemption and release. And she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The following morning, Evelyn awoke with a sense of urgency. The vision in the chapel had shaken her, but it had also steeled her resolve. The whispers were becoming clearer, their pleas more desperate. She knew she had to return to the crypt, to delve deeper into the secrets buried beneath the cathedral. After a quick breakfast at the Raven's Nest, she made her way back to St. Augustine's. The fog was thicker today, casting an eerie pall over the town. As she approached the cathedral, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Glancing over her shoulder, she saw nothing but the shifting mist and empty streets. Inside the cathedral, Evelyn headed straight for the crypt. She descended the narrow stone steps, her flashlight piercing the gloom. The cold, damp air wrapped around her like a shroud, and the silence was broken only by the echo of her footsteps. In the farthest chamber where she had previously discovered the unmarked graves, she paused. The sense of being watched was stronger here, an almost palpable presence in the air. She steeled herself and began to explore the chamber more thoroughly, examining the walls for any hidden alcoves or passages. Her patience was soon rewarded. Behind a loose stone near the back of the chamber, she found a hidden latch. With a mixture of excitement and trepidation, she pulled it, and a section of the wall creaked open, revealing a narrow passageway. Evelyn squeezed through the opening and into the passage. The air grew colder still, and the darkness seemed to press in on her. She moved cautiously, her flashlight revealing ancient stonework and the occasional fragment of bone. The whispers were louder now, almost guiding her steps. The passage opened into a larger chamber, its ceiling low and oppressive. Here, the atmosphere was even more oppressive, heavy with the weight of centuries of sorrow and suffering. In the center of the chamber stood a solitary coffin, its lid slightly ajar. Evelyn approached the coffin with a mixture of fear and curiosity. As she reached out to lift the lid, a sudden gust of cold air blew through the chamber, extinguishing her flashlight. She gasped, plunging into darkness. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She fumbled for her spare flashlight, finally managing to turn it on. The coffin's interior was lined with decaying fabric, and inside lay a skeletal figure, its bony fingers clutching a small, leather-bound book. Evelyn gently pried the book from the skeleton's grasp and opened it, revealing pages filled with cramped, spidery handwriting. The diary of Marjorie Whitcomb. Her heart pounded as she read the entries, each one painting a vivid picture of the woman's life and the injustices she had suffered. Marjorie had indeed been a healer, beloved by many but feared by those in power. The accusations of witchcraft had been a ruse, a means for the church to rid itself of a woman who threatened their authority. Evelyn felt a surge of anger and sorrow as she read Marjorie's final, desperate entries, written in the days leading up to her execution. She had been betrayed by those she had trusted, condemned by the very institution she had once revered. A sudden noise broke Evelyn's concentration. She looked up, her flashlight beam sweeping across the chamber. In the shadows, she saw movement, a figure standing just beyond the edge of the light. Her breath caught in her throat as the figure stepped forward, revealing the ghostly visage of a woman in a tattered bridal gown. It was the same apparition she had seen before, her eyes filled with a sorrowful plea. "Help us," the ghost whispered, her voice echoing in the cold, dark chamber. Evelyn's mind raced. The spirits were real, their pain and anguish palpable. She felt a deep connection to them, a responsibility to uncover the truth and bring justice to those who had been wronged. Clutching the diary to her chest, she made a silent vow. She would not rest until the full story was uncovered and the spirits of St. Augustine's were finally at peace. As she made her way back through the passage and up into the cathedral, the whispers followed her, their tones softer now, almost grateful. Evelyn knew that her journey was far from over. The forgotten crypt had revealed its secrets, but there was still much more to uncover, and she was ready to face whatever lay ahead. That night, back at the Raven's Nest, Evelyn sat at the small wooden desk in her room, the diary of Marjorie Whitcomb open before her. The pages, though fragile with age, seemed to pulse with the intensity of Marjorie's words. As she read, Evelyn felt as if she was stepping into Marjorie's life, experiencing her joys and sorrows, her hopes and fears. Marjorie's last entry was the most haunting. "They come for me at dawn, the churchmen, with their torches and chains. I am no witch, but who will believe me? May God have mercy on my soul, and may my spirit find peace. I can only pray that one day, the truth will be known." Evelyn's heart ached for Marjorie, a woman who had been so cruelly wronged. She closed the diary, resolving to continue her research in the morning. But as she prepared for bed, an uneasy feeling settled over her. The room seemed colder, the shadows deeper. She tried to shake off the sensation, telling herself it was just her imagination running wild after a day spent in the crypt. She turned off the light and crawled into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. The inn was quiet, the only sound the soft creak of the building settling. She closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep. But sleep did not come easily. She tossed and turned, her mind filled with images of the crypt and Marjorie's tragic story. Just as she began to drift off, a soft sound reached her ears, a faint, mournful weeping. Evelyn sat up, her heart pounding. The sound was coming from just outside her door. She hesitated, fear and curiosity warring within her. Finally, she swung her legs out of bed and grabbed her flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. She opened the door slowly, peering into the dimly lit hallway. The weeping grew louder, a sorrowful lament that seemed to echo off the walls. She followed the sound, her footsteps silent on the worn carpet. At the end of the hallway, near the stairs, she saw her. The apparition of a woman in a tattered bridal gown, her face streaked with tears. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. The ghost looked up, her eyes meeting Evelyn's. They were filled with a deep, indescribable sadness. "Help us," the ghost whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Please, help us." Evelyn took a step forward, her fear melting away in the face of the ghost's despair. "Who are you?" she asked softly. "How can I help you?" The ghost reached out a translucent hand, pointing toward the stairs. "They must be brought to justice. The truth must be known." Before Evelyn could respond, the apparition began to fade, her form dissolving into the darkness. The hallway was silent once more, but the ghost's words lingered in Evelyn's mind. The next morning, Evelyn awoke with a sense of purpose. The encounter with the ghost had solidified her resolve. She needed to uncover the full extent of the cathedral's dark history and bring the truth to light. She spent the day at the town library, sifting through old records and newspapers. The further back she went, the more she found evidence of the church's corruption. There were accounts of land seizures, wrongful imprisonments, and unexplained disappearances. It was clear that those in power had abused their positions, and the townspeople had suffered for it. As she pieced together the story, Evelyn felt a growing anger. These were not just isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern of abuse and exploitation, and the church had covered it up for centuries. That evening, she returned to the cathedral, determined to find more evidence. Father Benedict was nowhere to be seen, and the building was quiet. She made her way to the disused chapel where she had experienced the vision. The air was heavy with a sense of foreboding, but Evelyn pressed on. She approached the old tapestry, her fingers tracing the worn fabric. As she did, she felt a sudden rush of cold air and the faintest whisper of voices. This time, however, the vision did not come. Instead, she felt a presence behind her, a soft, almost imperceptible touch on her shoulder. Turning, she saw the ghostly bride once more. "Thank you," the ghost whispered. "You are closer now. We can feel it." Evelyn nodded, her resolve hardening. "I won't stop until the truth is known," she promised. The ghost smiled, a sad, wistful expression. "Be careful. They will try to stop you." With that, the apparition faded again, leaving Evelyn alone in the chapel. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the challenges ahead. The first apparition had given her a glimpse into the cathedral's dark past, but there was still much more to uncover. As she left the chapel, the whispers followed her, a reminder of the spirits who depended on her. Evelyn knew that the path she had chosen was fraught with danger, but she was determined to see it through. The ghosts of St. Augustine's had waited long enough for justice, and she would not let them down. Evelyn spent the next few days meticulously combing through every nook and cranny of St. Augustine's Cathedral, guided by the spectral whispers that seemed to grow more insistent with each passing hour. Her search led her to a small, neglected room at the back of the cathedral, a place long forgotten by the current clergy. The door was locked, but with the determined twist of her makeshift tool, the ancient lock gave way, and she stepped inside. The room was filled with dust-covered relics and artifacts, items that had been deemed too controversial or too cursed to be displayed openly. Among the clutter, one item immediately caught her eye. A small, ornate box, its surface covered in intricate carvings and symbols she recognized from her research as protective wards. Her heart raced as she carefully lifted the lid, revealing a tarnished silver amulet nestled within. As she touched the amulet, a wave of cold washed over her, and the room seemed to darken. Evelyn shivered, but she couldn't bring herself to let go. The amulet was beautifully crafted, but there was something undeniably sinister about it. She could almost hear the echoes of long-forgotten chants and feel the residual fear of those who had once possessed it. Evelyn wrapped the amulet in a cloth and placed it in her bag, resolving to study it further back at the inn. She spent the rest of the day poring over the cathedral's archives, hoping to find some reference to the relic. Her persistence paid off when she stumbled upon an old journal written by a former bishop, a man named Lucius Thorne. Thorne's journal was filled with dark rituals and incantations, descriptions of ceremonies held in secret, and sacrifices made to appease malevolent forces. One entry in particular stood out. The amulet has been hidden, its power too great and too dangerous. It binds the spirits of those wronged, their anguish feeding its curse. Only when the truth is revealed and justice served can their souls find peace. Evelyn's pulse quickened. The amulet was not just a relic, it was a key to the restless spirits trapped within the cathedral. But the journal also hinted at a darker force at play, something that had been feeding on the suffering of the innocent for centuries. That evening, back at the Raven's Nest, Evelyn sat at her desk, the amulet and Thorne's journal before her. As she examined the amulet under the soft glow of her desk lamp, she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The symbols on the amulet seemed to writhe and twist in the light, and the whispers grew louder, more urgent. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted, and the light flickered. Evelyn looked up, and there she was, the ghostly bride standing at the foot of her bed. This time, the apparition was clearer, more solid, her sorrowful eyes fixed on the amulet. "You must destroy it," the ghost whispered, her voice trembling. "It binds us to this place, to our suffering." Evelyn felt a pang of sympathy. "I will," she promised, "but I need to understand more. There's a darkness here, something that's been feeding on your pain. I need to know how to stop it." The ghost nodded, her form flickering. "The amulet is a vessel of our torment, but it also holds the key to our release. Find the truth, expose the church's sins, and the power of the amulet will be broken." With that, the apparition faded, leaving Evelyn alone in the cold, dark room. She stared at the amulet, her mind racing. The task ahead was daunting, but she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had to uncover the full extent of the cathedral's dark history and bring it to light. The next day, Evelyn returned to the cathedral, the amulet safely tucked away in her bag. She sought out Father Benedict, hoping he might have answers. She found him in the nave, lighting candles at the altar. "Father Benedict, I need to speak with you," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. The priest turned, his expression wary. "What is it, Dr. Harker?" Evelyn pulled the amulet from her bag, holding it up. "Do you know what this is?" Father Benedict's face went pale, and he crossed himself. "Where did you find that?" "In a hidden room in the cathedral. It's tied to the spirits that haunt this place, to the injustices committed by the church. I need to know the truth, Father." The priest hesitated, then sighed heavily. "The amulet is a relic of great power and great evil. It was created by Bishop Thorne, a man whose ambition and cruelty knew no bounds. He used it to bind the souls of those he wronged, to trap them in eternal torment. The Church has tried to forget, to bury the past, but the sins of our forefathers cannot be so easily erased. Evelyn nodded, her resolve hardening. I intend to expose the truth, to bring justice to those who suffered. Will you help me? Father Benedict looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Yes, Dr. Harker, I will help you. It is time the truth was known. Together, they began to piece together the full extent of Bishop Thorne's atrocities, uncovering records and testimonies long hidden away. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that the amulet was the key to breaking the curse. But to do so, they would have to confront the darkness that still lingered in the cathedral, a darkness that would not give up its power easily. As they prepared for the final confrontation, Evelyn could feel the spirits gathering around her, their whispers growing louder, their presence more tangible. The cursed relic had bound them for centuries, but she was determined to set them free, no matter the cost. The truth would be revealed, and justice would finally be served. Evelyn and Father Benedict spent the next several days delving deep into the cathedral's archives, uncovering more damning evidence of the Church's dark past. Each document and testimony they found painted a clearer picture of Bishop Thorne's reign of terror, his insatiable hunger for power, and the lengths he went to maintain his control over the town of Ravenscroft. One evening, as the sun set and cast long shadows across the cathedral, Father Benedict approached Evelyn with a bundle of old letters tied together with a faded ribbon. These were written by a group of priests who served under Thorne, he explained, his voice heavy with sorrow. They detailed their growing fear and regret over the bishop's actions. Evelyn took the letters, her hands trembling slightly. As she read through them, a chill settled over her. The letters spoke of secret rituals performed in the dead of night, of innocents tortured and sacrificed, and of a growing sense of dread among the clergy. The priests had tried to oppose Thorne, but they had been silenced, either through exile or death. One letter, written by a priest named Father Anselm, stood out. It described a hidden chamber beneath the cathedral, accessible only through a concealed passage in the confessional. This chamber was where Thorne had conducted his darkest rituals, using the amulet to bind the souls of his victims. Evelyn and Father Benedict decided to search for this hidden chamber, hoping it would hold the key to breaking the curse. They made their way to the confessional, their footsteps echoing in the empty cathedral. The confessional was an old, ornate structure, its wooden panels carved with scenes of penance and redemption. Father Benedict knelt and began to examine the floor of the confessional. After several minutes, he found a small, nearly invisible latch. With a firm tug, the floor panel lifted, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Evelyn took a deep breath and nodded to Father Benedict. "We have to see this through," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. Together they descended the stairs, the air growing colder and more oppressive with each step. At the bottom they found a heavy wooden door, its surface marked with strange symbols that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Father Benedict muttered a prayer under his breath and pushed the door open. The chamber beyond was a stark contrast to the rest of the cathedral. It was small, circular, and its walls were covered in arcane symbols and dark stains. In the center of the room stood an altar, and on it lay the remnants of the tools Thorne had used in his rituals. As they stepped into the chamber, a powerful wave of darkness washed over them. The air was thick with the lingering presence of malevolent forces. Evelyn felt a cold hand brush against her cheek, and she shuddered. The whispers were louder here, more insistent. Father Benedict moved to the altar, his face pale and grim. "This is where it happened," he said softly. "This is where Thorne bound their souls." Evelyn approached the altar, her eyes scanning the symbols etched into the stone. She reached into her bag and pulled out the amulet. The moment it was exposed, the chamber seemed to vibrate with a dark energy. "We need to destroy it," Evelyn said, her voice firm. "But how?" Father Benedict examined the symbols on the altar, his brow furrowed in concentration. "There is a way," he said finally. "A ritual of cleansing, a rite that can sever the bonds Thorn created. It requires both of us, and it will not be easy." Evelyn nodded, determination in her eyes. "Tell me what to do." Father Benedict began to chant, his voice low and steady. He directed Evelyn to place the amulet on the altar and to follow his lead in the incantation. As they chanted, the air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to press in around them. The symbols on the altar began to glow, and the amulet pulsed with a malevolent light. The whispers grew into a cacophony of anguished cries, the spirits fighting against the ritual. Evelyn felt a crushing pressure in her chest, as if unseen hands were trying to stop her heart. But she pushed through the fear, her voice rising with Father Benedict's. Together, their voices wove a powerful spell of cleansing and release. The glow from the symbols intensified, and a blinding light erupted from the amulet. With a final desperate shout, they completed the incantation. The amulet shattered, and a wave of energy surged through the chamber, sweeping away the darkness. The anguished cries faded into a peaceful silence, and the oppressive air lifted. Evelyn and Father Benedict collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. The chamber was now bathed in a soft, purifying light, and the lingering sense of malevolence had vanished. Evelyn looked at Father Benedict, a weary smile on her face. "We did it," she said softly. Father Benedict nodded, his expression one of solemn satisfaction. "Yes, but this is only the beginning. The truth must still be told, and the Church's sins must be exposed." Evelyn agreed. The spirits of St. Augustine's had been released, but the task of bringing justice to those who had suffered was far from over. With renewed determination, she vowed to continue her quest, to uncover the full extent of the Church's dark history, and to ensure that the truth would finally come to light. Evelyn and Father Benedict emerged from the hidden chamber, the weight of their discovery pressing heavily upon them. The air inside St. Augustine's Cathedral felt different now, lighter somehow, but the sense of unease lingered. They had unraveled a part of the dark past, but there were still pieces of the puzzle left to fit together. That night, as Evelyn sat at her desk in the Raven's Nest, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover. She pored over the diary of Marjorie Whitcomb again, searching for any overlooked detail. Marjorie's entries grew more frantic in the days leading up to her death, mentioning cryptic hymns that the choir would sing. Hymns she believed were part of the rituals that condemned her. Intrigued, Evelyn decided to investigate the choir loft the next day. The cathedral's choir had been disbanded long ago, and the loft had fallen into disuse, but she felt certain it held clues to the mysterious hymns Marjorie mentioned. The following morning, Evelyn climbed the narrow staircase leading to the choir loft. The wooden steps creaked under her weight, echoing in the vast silence of the cathedral. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the stone floor below. The loft was eerily quiet, the wooden pews covered in a thick layer of dust. Evelyn approached the old organ, its keys yellowed with age. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, feeling a cold draft brush against her skin. A shiver ran down her spine as she noticed a stack of sheet music, untouched for years, lying on the organ stand. Carefully, she picked up the top piece of music. The notes were familiar, but the lyrics were written in Latin, filled with dark and foreboding imagery. Evelyn's Latin was rusty, but she could make out enough to understand that these hymns were indeed part of the rituals used by Bishop Thorn. As she read through the sheet music, a soft sound reached her ears, a faint, ethereal singing. She froze, her heart pounding. The sound grew louder, and she realized it was coming from the choir itself. She turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing among the dusty pews, were ghostly figures, their mouths open in song. Their voices wove together in a haunting melody, the words echoing through the cathedral with an otherworldly resonance. Evelyn watched in awe and terror as the spectral choir sang, their faces a mixture of sorrow and longing. One figure stepped forward, her form more distinct than the others. Evelyn recognized her from the descriptions in Marjorie's diary, the choir director, a woman named Eliza, who had been executed for refusing to participate in Thorn's dark rituals. Eliza's eyes locked onto Evelyn's, and her voice seemed to pierce through the veil between the living and the dead. We sang for him, not knowing the power of our words. We were his instruments, bound by his will. You must finish what you've started. Free us. Evelyn nodded, her resolve strengthening. I will, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ghostly choir. The spirits began to fade, their song lingering in the air long after they had vanished. Evelyn's heart ached for them, their pain and suffering palpable. She knew she had to uncover more about the hymns and the role they played in Thorn's rituals. Returning to the nave, she found Father Benedict and shared her encounter with him. His face grew pale as she described the ghostly choir and the hymns. I've heard of those hymns, he said quietly. They were written by Thorn himself, designed to channel dark forces. The choir members were unwitting participants in his rituals, their voices used to bind the spirits of the innocent. We need to find out more about these hymns, Evelyn said determinedly. There must be records, something that can help us understand their power and how to break it. Father Benedict nodded. There are old manuscripts in the cathedral's library, texts that might hold the answers we seek. But be careful, Evelyn. Thorn's influence lingers in those hymns. They are dangerous. Together, they ventured to the cathedral's library, a dimly lit room filled with ancient books and scrolls. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of old paper filled their nostrils. They spent hours combing through the manuscripts, searching for any reference to the hymns and their purpose. Finally, Evelyn found a passage in an old, leather-bound tome. It described the hymns as bindings of sorrow, designed to trap the souls of the unjustly condemned. The only way to break the curse was to sing a counter hymn, a song of release and redemption. But there was a catch. The counter hymn had to be sung by someone who had not been tainted by Thorn's influence, someone pure of heart and strong of will. Evelyn's heart sank as she read the final line. Only through the pure voice of the living can the dead be set free. Father Benedict read over her shoulder and sighed. It's a heavy burden, but it must be done. We'll need to find someone who can sing the counter hymn and break the curse once and for all. Evelyn nodded, determination in her eyes. We will. For the spirits trapped here, for Marjorie, for all of them. We will set them free. The task ahead was daunting, but Evelyn knew they were closer than ever to uncovering the full truth. The haunted choir had given her a vital clue, and now it was up to her and Father Benedict to find the singer who could finally bring peace to the restless souls of St. Augustine's Cathedral. As days turned into weeks, the weight of Evelyn's mission began to take its toll. The burden of the cathedral's dark history and the suffering of the spirits trapped within its walls pressed heavily on her mind. Despite her progress, She felt increasingly isolated, her thoughts consumed by the relentless quest for the truth. The whispers of the dead had become a constant presence, haunting her waking hours and invading her dreams. Evelyn continued her research with Father Benedict, but the atmosphere in the cathedral had grown more oppressive. Shadows seemed to stretch longer, and the air was thick with an unspoken tension. The spirits, once merely an eerie presence, now felt more aggressive, their whispers turning to wails of despair and anger. One night, as Evelyn pored over an old manuscript in the cathedral's library, a sudden cold swept through the room, extinguishing her candle. The darkness was absolute, and she fumbled for her flashlight, her hands trembling. As the beam of light pierced the gloom, she caught sight of a figure standing in the corner, an apparition, its eyes burning with malevolence. "Leave this place," the ghost hissed, its voice echoing with the fury of 1,000 tormented souls. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Evelyn stood her ground, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I cannot leave. I must uncover the truth and set you free." The ghost's face twisted with rage, and it lunged toward her, its form dissolving into a cloud of shadows. Evelyn stumbled back, her heart racing, and the spirit's presence faded, leaving her alone once more. Shaken but undeterred, she returned to her work, determined to find the counter hymn and break the curse. Yet, as the days passed, her mind grew increasingly fragile. She found it harder to focus, her thoughts scattered and fragmented. The constant whispers had become a cacophony, drowning out her rational mind. Father Benedict noticed the change in her, his concern growing. "Evelyn, you need to rest," he urged one afternoon as they sat in the nave, surrounded by ancient texts. "The spirits are affecting you. If you don't take care, you will lose yourself to their madness." "I can't rest," Evelyn replied, her voice strained. "We're so close. I can feel it." Despite her determination, Evelyn could not deny the toll the cathedral's dark influence was taking on her. Her nights were plagued by vivid nightmares, visions of the horrors inflicted by Bishop Thorne and the suffering of the innocents. She saw their faces, twisted in agony, and heard their screams echoing in her mind. One night she awoke to find herself standing in the crypt, her bare feet cold against the stone floor. She had no memory of how she got there, and a deep sense of dread filled her. The unmarked graves seemed to close in around her, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Help us!" they cried. "Release us!" Evelyn stumbled back, her head spinning. She felt a presence behind her and turned to see the ghostly bride once more. Her face was etched with sorrow, her eyes pleading. "Please," the ghost whispered. "We are so close. Do not give up." Tears filled Evelyn's eyes. "I won't," she vowed, her voice breaking. "I promise I won't." But as she returned to her room at the Raven's Nest, the weight of her promise bore down on her. She felt herself slipping, her sanity fraying at the edges. The whispers followed her, a constant reminder of the souls depending on her. In a desperate attempt to regain control, Evelyn began to isolate herself, spending hours locked away in her room, her research papers scattered around her. She scribbled notes frantically, trying to piece together the final steps of the counter hymn. Her once neat handwriting became a chaotic scrawl, mirroring the turmoil in her mind. Father Benedict tried to reach out to her, but Evelyn pushed him away, consumed by her obsession. "I'm fine," she insisted, her eyes wild. "I just need more time." But time was running out. The spirits grew more restless, their presence more invasive. Evelyn could feel the darkness closing in, threatening to engulf her. She knew she had to find the counter hymn before it was too late, before she lost herself completely to the madness that had claimed so many before her. One stormy night, as lightning flashed and thunder rumbled, Evelyn found herself drawn back to the choir loft. She climbed the stairs, her movements mechanical, as if guided by an unseen force. The sheet music lay where she had left it, and she picked it up with trembling hands. As she began to sing the counter hymn, her voice wavered but grew stronger with each note. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, filled with a sorrowful hope. The cathedral seemed to come alive with the music, the oppressive air lifting slightly. But as she sang, the whispers turned to screams, the spirits fighting against the release. Evelyn's vision blurred, and she felt herself slipping into a trance, the world around her dissolving into darkness. She saw the faces of the condemned, their eyes pleading, and heard their voices crying out for justice. With a final desperate effort, Evelyn poured all her strength into the song, her voice rising above the cacophony. The counter hymn reached its crescendo, and a blinding light filled the choir loft, banishing the shadows and silencing the whispers. Evelyn collapsed to the floor, exhausted but triumphant. She had done it. The counter hymn was complete. But as she lay there, her vision fading, she knew her journey was not yet over. The spirits were free, but the truth still needed to be told, the sins of the past exposed for all to see. And as the darkness claimed her, Evelyn felt a sense of peace, knowing she had taken the first step toward breaking the cycle of suffering and bringing justice to the tormented souls of St. Augustine's Cathedral. Evelyn woke up in a small, dimly lit room with the faint smell of incense and aged wood lingering in the air. Her head throbbed and her body felt heavy, but she forced herself to sit up. She was in a modest bedchamber within the cathedral, a place she had never seen before. Father Benedict sat by her side, his face lined with concern. "You're awake," he said softly, relief evident in his voice. "You were unconscious for almost 2 days." Evelyn rubbed her temples, trying to piece together the events that had led her here. The counter hymn, the blinding light, the sense of peace. And then, darkness. "Did it work?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Father Benedict nodded. "Yes, Evelyn. The spirits have found peace. The cathedral is no longer haunted by their suffering." Evelyn sighed with relief, but she knew their work was not finished. "We need to reveal the truth, Father. The world needs to know what happened here." Father Benedict helped her to her feet. "I agree. The Church's sins must be exposed, and justice must be served." Together they returned to the cathedral's archives, their determination unwavering. They spent hours meticulously organizing the evidence they had gathered. Thorne's journal, the letters from the priests, Marjorie's diary, and the cursed relics. Evelyn also transcribed the counter hymn and detailed the rituals performed by Thorne, ensuring that the full scope of his atrocities would be known. Their final step was to present their findings to the church authorities and the public. Father Benedict arranged a meeting with the bishop and other high-ranking officials, hoping they would listen and act upon the evidence. The day of the meeting arrived, and Evelyn felt a mixture of anxiety and resolve as they entered the grand hall of the diocesan office. The bishop, a stern-looking man with piercing eyes, sat at the head of a long table, flanked by other clergy members. Father Benedict and Evelyn took their seats, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. Father Benedict began by recounting the history of St. Augustine's Cathedral, highlighting its architectural significance and spiritual importance. Then he delved into the darker chapters, presenting the evidence they had uncovered. Evelyn followed, her voice steady as she described the hauntings, the cursed relics, and the spirit's torment. She spoke of the counter hymn and the moment of release, emphasizing the need for acknowledgement and atonement. As they spoke, the expressions of the clergy ranged from shock to disbelief to deep sorrow. When they finished, the room fell into a heavy silence. The bishop finally spoke, his voice somber. "The evidence you have presented is overwhelming. It is clear that great injustices were committed, and that the Church has a responsibility to address these wrongs." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled clergy. "We must begin the process of atonement. We will publicly acknowledge the Church's sins, ensure that those responsible are remembered for their actions, and make reparations where possible." Evelyn felt a surge of relief. The truth would be known, and justice, in some form, would be served. As they left the meeting, Father Benedict placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You have done a great service, Evelyn. The spirits of St. Augustine's can finally rest in peace." In the weeks that followed, the story of St. Augustine's Cathedral spread throughout the town of Ravenscroft and beyond. The church issued a public apology, and a memorial was established in the cathedral to honor the victims of Thorne's atrocities. Visitors came to learn about the history, paying their respects and reflecting on the lessons of the past. Evelyn returned to the Raven's Nest, where she found solace in the quietude of the inn and the supportive presence of the innkeeper. She spent her days writing, documenting the entire journey in a book that would ensure the story of St. Augustine's would never be forgotten. One evening, as she sat by the window, watching the fog roll in over the town, she felt a presence beside her. She turned to see the ghostly bride, her form shimmering with a soft, ethereal light. But this time, there was no sorrow in her eyes, only gratitude. "Thank you," the ghost whispered, her voice a gentle breeze. "We are free because of you." Evelyn smiled, tears filling her eyes. "Rest in peace," she said softly. "You deserve it." The ghostly bride nodded and faded into the mist, leaving Evelyn with a sense of closure. The spirits of St. Augustine's were at peace, and so was she. The darkness had been lifted, and the cathedral, once a place of torment, had become a beacon of redemption and hope. And as Evelyn looked out into the night, she knew that her own journey was far from over. There were other stories to uncover, other truths to reveal. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had made a difference, that she had brought light to a place long shrouded in darkness.